creating a potential for overpayments of almost $13 million. Moreover, the border monitoring system reportedly does not work. Continuing to quote from the report, after spending more than $4.5 billion on screening equipment for the nation's entry ports, the Department of Homeland Security is now moving to replace or alter much of it because it's ineffective, unreliable, or too expensive to operate. For example, radiation monitors at ports and borders reportedly could not differentiate between radiation emitted by a nuclear bomb and naturally occurring radiation from everyday material like cat litter or ceramic tile. Quote from the report, the TSA awarded Boeing a cost-plus contract to install over 1,000 explosive detection systems for airline passenger luggage. After installation, the machines began to register false alarms, and screeners were forced to open and hand-check bags. To reduce the number of false alarms, the sensitivity of the machines was lowered, which reduced the effectiveness of the detectors. Now, despite these serious problems, Boeing received an $82 million profit that the Inspector General determined to be excessive. Again from the report, the FBI spent $170 million on a virtual case file system that does not operate as required. After 3 years of work under a cost-plus contract failed to produce a functional system, the FBI scrapped the program and began work on the new Sentinel case file system. Quote from the report, the Department of Homeland Security Inspector General found that taxpayer dollars were being lavished on perks for agency officials. One Inspector General report found that the TSA spent over $400,000 on its first leader's executive office suite. Another found that TSA spent $350,000 on a gold-plated gym. Quoting from the report, according to news reports, Pentagon auditors examined a contract between the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, and Unisys, a technology and consulting company, for the upgrade of airport computer networks. Among other irregularities, government auditors found that Unisys may have overbilled for as much as 171,000 hours of labor and overtime by charging for employees at up to twice their actual rate of compensation. Well, the cost ceiling for the contract was set at $1 billion. Unisys had reportedly billed the government $940 million, with more than half of the 7-year contract remaining and more than half of the TSA-monitored airports still lacking upgraded networks. In all these actions and decisions, President George W. Bush has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as President and Commander-in-Chief, and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice and cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President George W. Bush, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office. Article 17, illegal detention, detaining indefinitely and without charge persons, both U.S. citizens and foreign captives. In his conduct while President of the United States, George W. Bush, in violation of his constitutional oath to faithfully execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of his ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty under Article 2, Section 3 of the Constitution, to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, has both personally and acting through his agents and subordinates, together with the Vice President, violated United States and international law and the U.S. Constitution by illegally detaining indefinitely and without charge persons, both U.S. citizens and foreign captives. In his statement on February 7, 2002, President Bush declared that in the U.S. fight against al-Qaeda, quote, none of the provisions of Geneva apply, unquote, thus rejecting the Geneva Conventions that protect captives in wars and other conflicts. By that time, the administration was already transporting captives from the war in Afghanistan, both alleged al-Qaeda members and supporters, and also Afghans accused of being fighters in the army of the Taliban government, to U.S.-run prisons in Afghanistan, and to the detention facility at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. The roundup and detention, without charge, of Muslim non-citizens inside the United States began almost immediately after September 11, 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, with some being held for as long as 9 months. The U.S., on orders of the President, began capturing and detaining, without charge, alleged terror suspects in other countries and detaining them abroad and at the U.S. naval base in Guantanamo. Many of these detainees have been subjected to systematic abuse, including beatings, which have been subsequently documented by news reports, photographic evidence, testimony in Congress, lawsuits, and in the case of detainees in the U.S., by an investigation conducted by the Justice Department's Office of the Inspector General. In violation of U.S. law and the Geneva Conventions, the Bush administration instructed the Department of Justice and the U.S. Department of Defense to refuse to provide identities or locations of these detainees, despite requests from Congress and from attorneys for the detainees. The President even declared the right to detain U.S. citizens indefinitely, without charge, and without providing them access to counsel or the courts, thus depriving them, of their constitutional and basic human rights. Several of those U.S. citizens were held in military brigs in solitary confinement for as long as 3 years before being either released or transferred to civilian detention. Detainees in U.S. custody in Iraq and Guantanamo have, in violation of the Geneva Conventions, been hidden from and denied visits by the International Red Cross Organization, while thousands of others in Iraq, Guantanamo, Afghanistan, ships and in foreign offshore sites, and an unknown number of so-called black sites around the world have been denied any opportunity to challenge their detentions. The President, acting on his own claimed authority, has declared the hundreds of detainees at Guantanamo Bay to be enemy combatants, not subject to U.S. law and not even subject to military law, but nonetheless potentially liable to the death penalty. The detention of individuals without due process violates the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution. While the Bush administration has been rebuked in several court cases, most recently that of Ali al-Mahdi, it continues to attempt to exceed constitutional limits. In all of these actions, violating U.S. and international law, President George W. Bush has acted in a manner contrary to his trust as President and Commander-in-Chief, and subversive of constitutional government, to the prejudice of the cause of law and justice, and to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Wherefore, President George W. Bush, by such conduct, is guilty of an impeachable offense warranting removal from office.